Joining me now from Central Israel is Dr. Eitan Gilboa, a professor of political science at Bar-Ilan University and a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you so much for coming on this afternoon.
Thank you.
It's perhaps the most pressing question surrounding Putin's continued war in Ukraine. Will he or won't he pull the nuclear trigger?
And nobody knows the answer, because most of Putin's actions in this war have been unpredictable from day number one. Biden's speech yesterday is designed to deter Russia from using what is known as a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, given the poor performance of his military in Ukraine. And as you said, he's feeling that any loss in Ukraine is an existential threat to him. Biden is saying that any use of even tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine would be answered by the United States in NATO with devastating consequences to Russia.
Right, and on that point, we know that the international community, NATO, as well as the United States, have made sort of clear remarks as to what would go down should Russia intend to go down what they've called a dark road. But would Israel, who has long been suspected of having nuclear weapons, although has remained pretty quiet about it, possibly join in such an international response?
No. We don't have to be in every place in the world at any time. There have been several simulations, very serious simulations, of potential both Russian nuclear attack in Ukraine, as well as American responses. And those responses could be, experts are saying, attack on the Russian bases from which nuclear weapons may be launched. Number two, attacks on Russian soldiers and equipment inside Ukraine. Number three, elimination of the Russian Black Sea. So the assumption is that if Putin is not bluffing and he is serious about using a tactical weapon in Ukraine, the West will respond in conventional weapons, which would have similar consequences to the use of nuclear weapon without the limitations and the bad consequences of nuclear weapons.
Right, but back in 2020, Putin established what is called the Russian Nuclear Deterrence Doctrine, which essentially approved basic principles with 4 cases that Moscow could use those nuclear weapons. But thus far, none of those 4 criteria have been met in the current conflict. So does Putin have to justify this kind of move to the Russian public? How would they view such an attack?
Well, he will have to justify. And in recent days, there has been an increasing criticism of the Russian military performance in Ukraine and over the entire handling of the war. Putin would be very wrong to use any tactical weapon in Ukraine because it would completely change the rules of the game in international politics. And this is the background for the warnings he has been receiving from Biden yesterday and also from other leaders in Europe, telling him that this is going to be the end of the nuclear regime, nuclear taboo, since it was established after the Second World War. And I think those warnings may affect Putin. Many of my colleagues are saying that he's just bluffing. But with Putin, you never know.
Absolutely. And just before we let you go, Doctor, just briefly, we've discussed the potential scenarios should Russia decide to use nuclear weapons. But on the other hand, if he doesn't, how is the rest of the war going to play out?
Well, the question is what will happen on the ground in Ukraine. The initial motivation of Putin was to deter the West from supplying weapons to Ukraine, and he failed. His present motivation is to still prevent the supply of conventional weapons to Ukraine, and also to warn that he should not be pushed that hard to the wall. And if he were to, then tactical nuclear weapons would be an option.
Dr. Eitan Gilboa, Professor of Political Science at Bar-Ilan University and a Senior Fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you.